Hey kids, it's August 10th, Monday. I went into the office today and spent most of the first half of the day there. Your mother needed the car, so I took the train, had a few meetings on the way home, got quite a lot done, and later even managed to do some gardening. I cleaned up the grass a little, played with you, and eventually got you into bed. Now your mother is trying to get the younger one of you to sleep. And today, for some reason, I just looked at both of you and felt incredibly grateful. I love you so much. I feel genuinely blessed that you are my children and that this is my family. Anyway, today I want to talk about a strange kind of limitation. Not lack of money, not lack of talent, not someone physically standing in your way. Something much harder to see. Sometimes the ceiling above you simply isn't real. It is just the highest place your mind currently knows exists. Bear with me. I've seen this many times in my own life, and I see it quite often in people I coach. Someone comes to me and says, "I feel stuck in my career." Perhaps they are doing well professionally, but don't know what should come next. A common example is someone in an individual contributor role who wants to become a people leader. So they look at the options they know. Wait for a promotion, apply for an open management role, move to another company, maybe talk to their manager. They go around and around the same possibilities, and when none of them seems to work, they conclude there are no options. But that conclusion may not be true. Perhaps the problem isn't that none of their options works. Perhaps there are options they cannot see yet. This brings us to something I find fascinating. Unknown unknowns. There are things you know. You know how to walk. You know your own name. There are also things you know you don't know. Maybe you know cars exist, but you don't know how to drive one. You know there are languages you cannot speak. You know there are areas of science you don't understand. Those gaps are relatively easy because at least you know they exist. Then there is a third category, things you don't know that you don't know. Imagine you had never heard of a car, not simply that you couldn't drive. The entire concept of driving did not exist in your mind. Then I tell you, you need to get somewhere quickly. Why don't you drive? You wouldn't say, "I don't know how." You would say, "What are you talking about?" You cannot choose an option you don't know exists. That is what makes unknown unknowns so interesting. You cannot search for the answer to a question you don't yet know how to ask. Here is another way to think about it. Imagine I give you a beautifully drawn map of a city. Everything on the map is perfectly accurate. The roads are correct. The distances are correct. You study this map for years. You memorize every street. Eventually, you become incredibly good at finding the fastest route from one place to another. There is only one problem. Half the city is missing from the map. Whole streets, whole neighborhoods, entire bridges you don't know exist. You might become the greatest expert in the world on that map and still never visit those places. Not because the streets aren't real, but because from your perspective, they aren't there. I think our minds work in a similar way. We all carry around mental maps of how life works, how careers work, how relationships work, how money works, what people like us are supposed to do, what is possible, what is impossible, what a good life looks like. And then, as we move through life, we slowly add streets. Education adds streets. Books add streets. Failure certainly adds streets. Travel adds streets. Trying things adds streets. Meeting people who think completely differently from you adds streets. And every now and then, someone shows you an entire neighborhood you had no idea existed. Suddenly your map changes. And once you have seen that neighborhood, you cannot completely go back to the old map. This is one reason I've come to appreciate coaching so much. Let's go back to the person who tells me, "I want to become a leader." I could simply give them instructions. Do this. Develop this skill. Speak to this person. Volunteer for that project. Demonstrate this behavior. And sometimes that is exactly what they need. Advice is useful, but sometimes the more valuable thing is asking questions. Why do you want to become a leader? What do you think leadership actually means? Why would someone trust you with a team? Where are you already leading without having the title? What are you waiting for permission to do that you could start doing now? What other paths toward leadership might exist? A good question can reveal a street that wasn't on the map before, not because the coach magically has every answer, but because the question forces the person to look somewhere they hadn't looked. That is important. Sometimes simply handing someone an answer doesn't work very well. If an idea is too far outside their current map, they may not even understand why it matters. Awareness often has to develop first. And kids, I want you to remember this because one day you will feel stuck too. Everybody does. Maybe professionally, maybe personally, in a relationship, with a project, with a difficult decision. You may look around and say, "These are my options." Whenever you hear yourself saying that, be careful. Your actual options and the options you can currently see are not necessarily the same set. Sometimes they are. Sometimes you genuinely have only a few choices. But sometimes your map is simply incomplete. There is an important warning here. I do not want you to believe that every limitation is imaginary. That is nonsense. Some walls are real. You have limited time, limited money, responsibilities. Your bodies have limits. Your abilities have limits. Circumstances you cannot control will sometimes close doors. Luck matters. Timing matters. And yes, there will be things you are simply not good enough to do yet. Possibly things you may never become good enough to do. Reality matters. Do not stare at a concrete wall and convince yourselves it exists only because your mindset is negative. But also learn to distinguish a real wall from an incomplete map. When your mind says, "I can't do this," try changing the sentence slightly. "I don't currently know how to do this." Those sentences sound similar, but they lead somewhere very different. "I can't do this" can end the investigation. "I don't currently know how" begins one. Maybe after investigating, you will still conclude that it cannot be done. Fine. At least now you know more. But perhaps you discover a skill you could learn, a person you could ask, a route you had never considered, a technology that changes the problem, a completely different way of defining what you were trying to achieve. Something can appear impossible from where you are standing and look completely different after you move 10 meters to the side. This is also why intellectual humility matters so much. Socrates became famous partly because of his willingness to question what people claimed to know and to recognize the limits of his own knowledge. That may sound simple. It isn't. Saying, "I don't know," can be difficult, especially when you become experienced. But there is perhaps an even deeper form of humility. There are things I don't even know that I don't know. That sentence keeps the door open. So how do you discover something you cannot see? You cannot directly search for an unknown unknown. If you knew exactly what to search for, it would already be a known unknown. What you can do is build a life that increases your chances of bumping into new streets. Stay curious. Read outside your own field. Travel. Speak to people from different backgrounds. Talk to people who disagree with you. Ask younger people questions. Ask older people questions. Find mentors. Coach others. Allow yourselves to be coached. Teach things, because teaching exposes gaps in your own understanding surprisingly quickly. Experiment. Try small things. Fail occasionally. Put yourselves in rooms where you are not the smartest or most experienced person. Those experiences expand the map. And especially when you feel stuck, do not ask only, "Which of these options should I choose?" Also ask, "What options might I not be seeing?" Sometimes the answer will still be, "These are the options, and none of them is particularly good." Life does that too. You don't need to invent a secret door every time reality gives you a difficult choice. But it is worth checking before you accept the ceiling. Because imagine spending 10 years crouching in a room because you believe the ceiling is 1 meter high. Then one day, someone walks in and simply stands up. The ceiling was 3 meters high the whole time. You were not trapped by the room. You were trapped by your understanding of the room. That would be a terrible waste. And I think we all do smaller versions of this. I'm not leadership material. People like me don't start companies. I'm bad with money. I could never live in another country. I'm too old to learn that. This is simply how relationships work. Maybe. But before you build your life around one of those conclusions, investigate. Ask, how do I know? What evidence would change my mind? Who has done this differently? What am I assuming? What would someone with a completely different map see here? You may discover that the wall is real. Respect it. Or you may discover a door. Walk through it. Kids, the map you have today will never contain the whole world. Neither does mine. Neither does anyone else's. There will always be streets we haven't discovered, ideas we have not encountered, people who can show us things we cannot currently imagine. That shouldn't frighten you. I think it is exciting. It means feeling stuck does not always mean you are truly stuck. Sometimes it simply means you have reached the edge of your current map. So keep adding streets, keep discovering neighborhoods, keep asking questions. Stay humble enough to know that you do not see everything. And never mistake the edge of your map for the edge of the world. And do not ever forget, I love you both very, very much.